Welcome to Small Town Pulse with Steve and Melissa, the podcast where the heart of small town life beats loud and clear. Each week, we dive into real stories behind the challenges and successes of living in a tight-knit community. This is where small town dreams, drama, and determination come to life. This is Small Town Pulse, and you're right on beat.
So today on Small Town Pulse with Steve and Melissa, we're honored to have Dr. Willie Foster, superintendent of Spencer County County Schools. He has been a driving force behind some of the exciting developments in the district. Dr. Foster, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Tell us a little bit about yourself. I know you've had a pretty long career in education.
Yeah, it's bizarre to say this out loud, but I'm starting my 27th year, which, people tell you it goes fast, and you don't believe it, and it goes fast. My path to the superintendent chair was probably a little more windy than some. Most people know and remember me as principal at Willie East High School, and that was an incredible run. When I got there, I actually had started my teaching career there, and I came back 12 years later as principal. And the school was in a tough spot. They were labeled a needs improvement school. The climate and culture was in a dark place, and we dug in and we went to work. And when I left, we were a top 10 high school and a school of distinction. And it was probably the most enjoyable and hardest point in my career. But 4 years later, my tank was on E, and I really looked for what was next. And so we had some opportunities at the district level, and I took on a really different job for me. It was called the Director of College and Career Readiness and Innovative Programs, which I don't know that I've ever considered myself innovative, but it was a unique job, and it gave me 1 year to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. I was teaching at Bellarmine in the principal prep program in the evenings and in the summers. I was working on my doctorate, and I was being a dad. That was another part too. And so at the end of that year, a former colleague, a guy named Greg Schultz, had been named superintendent in Oldham County, and he asked me to consider being an assistant superintendent for him. So I went to Oldham County, and that was probably one job that I took and accepted that I knew wasn't a forever job. Not that any job is forever anymore, but Tracy and I had no plans to move. Oldham County was a great community. It was a great school district. It was a great experience. But I had that feeling when I started. So I was there 4 years, and I had a lot of connections to Louisville Male High School, and so. I learned a lot from my stint at Bullitt East in regards to, I said, but at the end I was out of, my tank was on E, out of gas. And so to kind of have another chance to be a principal at a school like Male was kind of a once in a career, once in a lifetime opportunity. The unique thing about that job, it's the only time, and I would never do it again, but I started mid-year, which you think about it, you think you might know, but I had no idea what starting mid-year would be like. And so I started in December of 19, was principal for 61 days, and we closed for COVID. And so the bookends of my tenure there were really good. The middle of COVID was anything but. So navigating COVID in the chair of principal was something that, I don't know that I'll ever be able to verbalize what it was like. Adding JCPS to that in the city of Louisville during all of that was just something that it was a crazy ride. And so I was principal there for 3.5 years in total, because I started mid-year, 4 school years, 3.5 years in total. And ironically, the Spencer County topic had came up a year before. So Spencer County had a lot going on with the superintendency, and a man named Chuck Abel, agreed to be the interim superintendent and did a fantastic job. So there were some questions whether or not they would do the process, and would have been the summer of 22, and they chose not to, which worked out well for me because I wouldn't have been ready then. And so in the spring of 23, they did a search, and I have a lot of roots in Spencer County, so my family is mostly here. And my mom lived in Mount Washington because she worked at Baptist East. So this was before what's still called the New Road, or Gene Snyder. So she lived in Mount Washington to get to Baptist East. So my family was there, but her family and our family was mostly here. So a lot of roots here, a lot of connections here. So I came to Spencer County in July of 23. So in many ways, it was like coming home. In many ways, I was brand new. And so I know that sounds weird, but so I'm entering year 3, in the chair of superintendency. It's a crazy job. When people say 24/7, 365, it is every bit of that. Yeah. And so it's there's a lot of things we're blessed with. Families move here because of our school district. The growth is a double-edged sword. The growth brings us resources. It brings us things that we've not had. It also comes with the challenge of keeping up with the growth. And so I don't know. That's that's a little bit about my background. It's my 27th year. I've told the board, and I've been very clear. I've not wavered on, like, this will be my final chapter, and I hope it's a long one. And so it's this job has rejuvenated me in ways that I didn't really think were still possible. First day of school was a month from Monday. And I feel more excited about the first day of school in year 27 than I think I did in year 1 or 2 or 3, and which is pretty cool to still say that out loud.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I first met you at one of the chamber meeting luncheons that we had that one time, and you said you always seemed approachable. You seemed a little timid because you were new and trying
Sure.
to get your feet wet and everything. But you were always approachable. You always told me if I had any questions or
Sure.
needed anything, to reach out to you, and I could see that. And I've seen the strides that have been made since, because our kids started out here when we moved out here about 8 years ago. One went to middle school, the other one was in high school. She graduated, and the other one started Spencer County High School. And I could see the difference in from then to now. There's been a lot of changes for the positive.
Thank you.
One thing I do know, which I was surprised to find out, how much homeschooling goes out in this county, and how is that? Is it a challenge for you? Can you integrate with it?
Yeah, and I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No.
Steve, nationally, it's a growing trend, and so one of the things that I talk about with our team regularly is we can't ignore families that want options. Obviously last year in the state of Kentucky, Amendment 2 was on the ballot, and Amendment 2 essentially was sold as a school choice bill, and that's a whole nother conversation.
We don't get political in this.
Correct. Yeah, and I don't want to do that. But the reality and the conversations that came from that, there are families that are looking for options. And those options come with a number of reasons. But at the end of the day, people in their home and their child, and that's their baby, they sometimes make different choices. And so one of the things we've talked about is we run a virtual academy. And in Spencer County, for us, that's grades 6 through 12. So we don't offer it K through 12 yet. And, one of the things we know, and we're going to use this year as a chance to kind of dig into that, is to make sure we have a window of options for K through 12. One of the things that I'm proud of, when I was in Jefferson County, the whole concept of remote learning and virtual stuff was there before COVID, but it looked different. And obviously families experienced during COVID, I think mostly were tough. The reality that's another conversation. But, there are some kids and some families that thrived in that structure. It gave them options. It gave them the ability to maybe work on school for a few hours and do something else and then come back and focus on school later. That you weren't confined to the traditional school day, if you will. And so one of the things that is a goal of mine is to make sure that we have a virtual academy, that people choose us and really kind of get a homeschool experience, but also have a guaranteed viable curricular experience, but also access to extracurriculars and activities and arts and those kinds of things. I think if we don't go down that path, it's a missed opportunity, and it kind of, in some degrees, I say drive a wedge because that sounds negative and it's not intended to be, but it could also drive the wedge further in folks that just choose not to attend, our school district. So, it's a reality here, but also if you look nationally, if you look, Kentucky wide, it's a real thing. There's a school, Steve, they call it the Kentucky Virtual School, but it's over in Cloverport Independent of all places, which is Western Kentucky. But they have a virtual school that enrolls about 1,000 kids in the state of Kentucky, and so they use a curriculum from Florida, which catches a lot of attention. They're not a very high performing district, but that's I don't know the dynamics of that, but what that shows you is there's a niche where folks are looking for options. And so in Spencer County, students that are in our virtual academy still get to play sports. They still get to do performing arts. They still get to do those things. Some districts don't allow that. But again, I think that's something we're going to have to look at. I think for us right now, the opportunity that we have to look at is to offer a virtual option for families K through 5. Because if folks choose that homeschool route, then they're probably not coming back to us grades 6 through 12. Many do. Last year, I'd say we probably enrolled 10 to 15 students who had done either homeschool or virtual, and they wanted to come back to the in-person experience. So it's a real thing. As a dad, I can do nothing but respect it. And understand that people wake up and look at their child and feel like they're going to do what's best for them, and that's totally understandable. So.
In our small town, our county, would you say that we have less homeschools than the rest of the state? Because I would think in a small town that it would be less prevalent than in maybe Louisville, Jefferson County.
Yeah, I think if you're looking for more like programs, like if folks choose a site and go to homeschool under that umbrella, the quantity of homeschools is probably smaller. We have some that just choose to do it privately in their home, and some that choose to go to more like a program, whether it's like religious affiliated or things like that. So it looks all different in every spot. I can tell you that.
We just want these kids educated.
Absolutely,
That's all we're after,
absolutely.
right?
And that's one thing about that I notice about Spencer County itself is it is about the kids and their education. Like you said, people want to move here just to go to the schools. I mean, I've heard people on a wait list to try and get an apartment or something just to come here so that their kid can go to the schools. And that's a great testament, I believe. Like I said, I think a lot of it has to do since you've come on. I didn't know as much before. Like I said, the kids went to school. I worked, so I didn't really stay behind them as much unless there was an issue. And, you get in touch with the principal or whoever you had to talk to and try and squash it. And that's the most I've had with the schools. But now all my kids are grown and out of the house, which is great. But I do notice how people do support, because like I've been in cities where people turn around and say, well, I have no kids going to that school. Why do I have to pay taxes? And it's not a small chunk. It's a big chunk that comes out. But that's what helps support what we have now, the sports program that has thrived in the last couple of years. Baseball team, basketball team that made it to parts that they've never made it before.
Historical runs.
It's
been special. And and to watch how the community supports it and backs it it's the way it's supposed to be. When I was at Mail, we went to the Sweet 16 3 out of 4 years.
Wow.
And I'm not gonna. I don't want to sound like I'm saying this is a negative. It was just a reality. But there, we were going to the Sweet 16. Here it was. We're going to the Sweet. Everybody stopped and parades through towns, and that is special. And that's a lifetime of memories for those kids, which is awesome. So.
I don't even remember stuff like that going on in Mount Washington.
Yeah, and I think...
Which is another smaller town.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it had the same community involvement that we have here.
Absolutely. And I would agree with that.
Yeah, this is something that just, it really is special.
Yeah.
Even though, the way I know Dr. Foster is my son went to Bullitt East when he was principal there.
Yeah.
And when hearing you say all the things that you've done since being principal there reminded me how old I am. So thank you for that this morning. I really appreciate that. But I feel more connected to Spencer County schools than I do to Bullitt County schools, even though I didn't have a kid that went through the school system.
Yeah.
But because of the community and being here and working here and living in Taylorsville, I feel so connected to our school system, and it is amazing to see how not only the community but the business community really gets behind the school system.
Yeah.
That's something you can always count on if you want to throw some kind of event that helps the school system, the kids. The business community shows up.
Absolutely.
And they show up with their dollars big time.
They don't blink an eye. Last year, one of the things it's like there's so many things you can take for granted and so many things that kind of become normal and people kind of forget. But one of the things Spencer County does, and I didn't start this existed before I got here, but we do an opening day for our staff. And and the first time we did it, it was in the middle school's auditorium, and then last year we had to move it to the high school for space. But we're the largest employer in Spencer County. 550 employees if you include everybody. And so we do an opening day thing, and it's a chance I get to talk to everybody, and we introduce our new staff, and that's the one time we feed everybody. We do a breakfast, and then they want to get back to their schools and get their classroom set up, which is great. But it was important to me to make that special and different. So one of the things we did last year was, I think there's 80 tables, in the room wherever we are to feed them. And so, I saw an idea at a place and said, what if we got and asked the business community to sponsor tables? And, knowing we had 80, my goal last year is, man, if we could get half of those tables sponsored and, make a big deal, we'll fill in the rest. And we had 80 and then some. It was amazing. And, so, back to your point, Melissa, we didn't have to beg. We didn't have to, it was just amazing. And then what I watched the day that all those folks come in to set up, they're competitive. And so, it was like, well, wow, maybe this bank did this and I work at this bank and I like what they did. And next year we're going to do, so the day they were setting up, we're already talking about next year, which is, in a month or so. So
I had a lot of those conversations with people there that day. Absolutely.
So it's exciting.
It'll be really fun to see it this year.
It will be.
To see the progression of the decor and the...
We might have created a monster.
Maybe.
We'll find out. So.
That's awesome. No, yeah, and that's another thing I noticed too is the accolades and the recognition you give to your staff and the people that work for the school system. The different awards given out. It makes people feel appreciated, And I know one of the toughest things, because again, going back to when I was in New York, I owned an educational toy store. And when the teachers would come in and they blew their budget that they had for the year and the money was coming out of their own pocket, they wanted to do for the kids. And I see the same here. So I know that that's a challenge. I wonder how big of a challenge is it here with the budgets for the teachers in the classrooms and stuff like that.
Well, there's never enough money, and it's one of those, I tell people, until you sit in the chair, you don't really know the number of leaves on the money tree until you have to be the one that's responsible for those leaves. I remember going from an assistant principal to a principal, like, well, we don't, well, I've not found any magic spots or holes where money was hidden. Like, we have what we have. And the role of superintendent is really very similar. And, typically a going rate for your personnel costs in a district is between 80 and 85%. So most of our money is to pay our staff. And so when you think about what's left, you've got to do transportation, you've got to do food, you got to keep your buildings up. And so, there's never enough, but I will tell you, we are very blessed. We've had folks that have come before me, and I think the folks that work with me now, we've been very frugal. I don't think we spend extravagantly, but if there's anything that there's a need is to make sure that money gets to the classroom. Last year we picked a brand new reading curriculum, K through 5. And, we had choices that, we could have bought real tangible resources to give to teachers or like online resources. And so we chose, let's get the real tangible stuff and give to our folks. Let's make sure they're trained. Like those kinds of things are the things that, in my opinion, make a difference. And, that the other thing where we're blessed in Spencer County is our education foundation. I don't know if you've got a chance to talk to Sarah Brown and her folks, but what they're doing is special. And so, over the course of about 3 years, I think they've raised upwards of $400,000 and give grants back to teachers. So if a teacher says, so now they call it the Great Idea Award, which is just really cool. It's got a light bulb thing. And so if a teacher says, robotics is an example. I might be a science teacher. I want to teach my kid about robotics, but instead of just teaching them from a book or from an internet site, let's build them. And, so sometimes those little extra things are the things that make such a difference if a teacher knows that they have an opportunity, to do something like that. So another example of the community showing up and making sure that it's possible.
And those hands-on experiences, I think we do those a lot here in Spencer County with education. And I think, it's so needed because not everybody learns the same way. And I think we have a lot of different opportunities and ways to learn here.
Yeah. I can remember when the term was college and career readiness. And so it was put into state accountability, probably, I'm going to say in the window of probably 2013 or 14. It all kind of runs together now. But it became part of how districts and schools were held accountable. So are your kids prepared to graduate when they graduate? Are they college ready or ready to go into the workforce? And again, what could be a whole nother conversation is the metrics and how that's measured and all of that, and it's evolved over time. But the idea and the theory makes a lot of sense that when you hand a kid a diploma, it's more than just checking off 22 credits. Are they really ready? But the byproduct that I've seen from that, the good, is it has really forced districts and schools to say, are our kids having experiences that help them, right? So I'll use an example. Like, we have an incredible health science program at the high school. So last year I went to, they called a pinning ceremony. And so 45 kids had a nursing assistant certification. They were employable the day that they graduated from high school.
That's amazing.
Phlebotomy. There were kids drawing real blood in high school that they were gainfully employable the very next day. And that's special. Yeah. And so you go back to, the point in time when the state says you're going to be held accountable for college and career readiness. It was intimidating to some degree. But what I've watched over a decade plus is it's forced people to say, what kind of experiences are we giving our kids? And which I think has been a very, very good change. Long overdue, to be honest with you. So I try not to get too caught up in, the college-bound kid or the career-bound kid, because I honestly believe those two things are one and the same. Ultimately the goal is for a kid to make a life. You want them to make a life where they have a career that they're passionate about, they're doing something that they enjoy. And every kid's got to figure that out a little bit differently. And so, our job is to make sure that they're exposed, they get to explore a little bit. And
they're inspired.
Yeah, and that learning's not boring. Right. That's another thing too. And so, we put a laser cutter in our FFA room. It's this massive thing that cuts out sheet metal. It's tied to a CNC machine. And that experience is huge for kids. Yeah. And some of the things they produce, when you step back and look at it, it just makes you say, wow. it's impressive. So good stuff.
We even had the school system create the awards for Christmas on Main.
Right.
Yeah.
For like the best parade float, the best Christmas tree and all that. So I didn't even know
Yeah.
that was an option. Of course, we've had the culinary program out to cater lunch at the chamber at a luncheon. We've got a dog grooming set up now at the high school where people can actually bring their dogs and have them groomed, and the kids are getting trained in how to do that.
Yeah.
So many very cool things,
Yeah.
and so many things that people are getting exposed to. So cool.
That is, because a couple of times, I think I had spoken to you about it at one of the meetings, about how getting the kids the help where maybe doing a apprenticeship program with like Ford or one of these big companies, and I know money and time and things like that. So doing these smaller things to get people ready, and then maybe opening up new programs later on would be a great thing.
Yeah, I think one of the things we tend to maybe dwell on too much is when you think about career pathways in high school. I guess you could say maybe some of the skeptics would say, a 15-year-old kid, they don't know what they want to do. Some do, but sometimes what we have to understand is those experiences, whether they directly go into that field or choose not to, those experiences have value. I'd use culinary as a great example. I don't know that there's anybody that would say 100% of our kids who go through the culinary program are going to go do culinary arts as a career. Some do, and that's fantastic. But they also learn, how do I work with other humans? How do I budget for a project? How do I deal with customers? Like, there's so much good that comes out of those experiences, and some of it directly relates to the career that they choose to do, and some of it doesn't, and that's okay. My daughter was a performing arts kid, and she's now a choir director at Dare County High School, and she went through an accounting program. And obviously she's not doing accounting, but she's very money-minded. And, so a lot of the things that she took and learned from that, indirectly help her, greatly as a young adult. And knock on wood, it continues to do that. Time will tell.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, back in the day when I went to high school, you had those woodworking classes, all those shop classes. You had.
You're showing your age, Steve.
I am. I know. I'm I'm proud of my age. I didn't think I'd make it this far, but yeah, there was a lot of that going. I mean, there was even a photography class. Now photography is way different than sitting in a dark room and doing your own film. But we had those chances to test those and say, okay, I'm interested in this part. I'll take this class. And I think the options like you're giving the students is a great option to help them find their way around.
I think sometimes you just have to be exposed to different things to even know what you want.
Absolutely.
Or what you don't want, or whatever. You're inspired one way or the other. I mean, I did, so I went to Central my freshman year in Jefferson County, and that was when magnet programs were a thing. And Central had a bunch of different programs. They had legal, they had pharmacy, they had a vet tech program, several others I don't remember. But our freshman year, we had to rotate like 6 weeks, and we had to do every program.
That's cool.
And then our sophomore year, we decided which program we wanted to kind of lean into.
Focus on.
Yeah.
I wish I had this student's name, and admittedly I do not. But I can remember, I can tell you when you serve as principal, there's kind of a process for kids that get off the rails some days. And so we had a young man who I think had seen every assistant principal, and it was time to see me. And so I remember talking to him, and one of my questions with the kid is I always just try to dig a little deeper. And I said, "What's your plan?" And it was a male student. He said, "I'm gonna be an influencer." And I was like, "That's silly." Like what are you talking about? And look at where we are now.
Right.
And I'm like, so the reality is, kids that are in school today will do jobs that don't exist. And that's probably the best thing we can tool them for would be that they're going to have to adapt. AI is a great example. It's changing the game, for everything. And so, so how can we teach kids what AI is, what it can do, how to responsibly use it, and then really how does that parlay into, the endless possibilities that it will become. And so, that's a reality, that we're preparing kids for jobs right now that don't exist. And that's heavy.
I hadn't thought about that,
Yeah.
but that's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on which way it goes. It's like that's never going to happen, and then all of a sudden, like you said, here's AI. Here's so it's a great experience. I'm glad that you decided to come on and give us a little bit of a outlook on everything. And what do you see going forward? Anything?
A lot. So probably, Steve, our biggest challenge is growth. There's a lot happening in Spencer County that I think not just things that are going to impact, the next 5 years, but honestly 25 years. And, every time that we grow, it impacts Spencer County schools, and you have to scale everything. 30 new students is one new teacher, a bus route, feeding them, so you have to scale the growth. And so, it's interesting. This year's a great example. We're a growing community, but there's ebbs and flows in our population. So like right now, our kindergartners to be appears to be a small class, which is crazy. From the district K through 12 right now this summer, we've trended up. So some years we will grow in certain grades, and some years we'll have a small grade. Right now, our 8th grade class to be is our smallest class in our county. That's the year they changed the kindergarten birth date thing. So, but back to the point about the growth. For us, obviously the obvious is physical facilities. If you look on paper, every one of our buildings is at capacity. Do we have room we could grow to an extent? We do. But the reality is, growth is going to be a challenge that we're going to be faced with for a while, and that's just something that we're going to have to face. And I'll tell you the other thing, where we've been in a bubble, compared to many places across Kentucky and nationally, is just staffing. And I've seen positive trends in staffing. I've seen some that concern me. Right now, teachers who teach students with special needs is a challenge. And, some of those things is real. And so, I think when our folks where we live, we listen to the news about Jefferson County, and whether you agree, disagree, that doesn't matter. But, their retired superintendent, Dr. Polio, said loudly, this staffing thing's not going away. Right. So we've been in a bubble. And, knock on wood, we've been pretty protected from it. But I can tell you, when I first became a principal, I would use English teacher as an example. I'd have 25 English teacher applicants. Now you probably have 5, so that is changing. When you look at data from colleges and universities, they're not graduating teachers like they once did. But I think all of that is cyclical. I think you'll have windows of time where the numbers are lower and times where it will grow. We're getting a lot of folks right now who come to teaching who have done something else, which is cool, but it's different. And so growth and staffing, I think, would be the 2 things that we've got to continue to stay out in front of. Last year for the first time, we went to career fairs all over the state, and it was pretty neat. And to see the quality of young people that are going into teaching, how eager they were. But we're going to have to adapt with that. Like we're talking about next year, what's called early contracts. So we went to it's called GREC, GRREC something, but it's an educational cooperative down near Bowling Green. And so we had a lot of students from Campbellsville and Western Kentucky University were the 2 most common. And, I've told our HR folks, we're going to have to get ready, to look at it differently, where we say, you meet a kid in March and say, how about a contract in Spencer County? Knowing that you may not be able to place them until June or July, but you got them under contract. So starting to think outside the box and doing a little bit differently than we've done. If we don't do that, the staffing thing could get more directly impactful here, which we don't want that to happen. So I think the other thing is just continuing to raise the bar just with the academic experience. I'm very passionate about literacy. I'm an old coach, and I believe that fundamentals travel. No matter where you play, if your team is fundamentally sound, you're going to be okay. Yep. And I think the most fundamental thing we can do for kids is to get them to love to read and to teach them to read. And so that's something we're really focusing on this year. And, fortunately now, I think there's a lot more information about how reading is taught. I think I grew up in an era where it looked very differently than it looked for the couple decades after that. And we're kind of going back now to more of a fundamental approach to how we teach kids to read. And, that's something that I think COVID brought to the forefront, good or bad. I think that will end up being one of the good byproducts of that time. And so, growth, staffing, fundamental things, it's not fancy, it's not easy, but those are the things we're kind of digging into.
Well, sometimes fancy isn't always that great.
Yeah. And it isn't always reality.
Right.
No, it isn't. It isn't. And, we have an outstanding chief academic officer, Amanda Butler. She's really, really good. And I've talked to her about doing the women supporting women thing through the chamber, by the way. But one of the things I often tell her is we're not chasing the shiny new toy. We're going to get good at the fundamental stuff. And so, we're kind of doubling down on literacy, and that's it's a lot. It's very broad. It's everything from how we teach it to do we put things in front of kids that are interesting, that kind of gets lights a fire, that they're inspired by reading. Reading now is different. Some kids still pick up the old-fashioned book, and some read off a screen, and you got to be able to figure out and navigate both. And so, kind of the things we're working in. And really, what's crazy when you do get old, our workforce is now younger, and so like our students, they are different. They learn differently. They think differently, and that's okay. You just got to change and evolve with that. It's going to be front and center this year. There's a new Senate bill about texting and social media use
yes.
with
Yeah.
staff and kids, and so that's something we're navigating. Spencer County, we're in pretty good shape. We already purchased a tool last year, so we're kind of a year ahead of everybody else. But the one thing that I've told anybody, that's approach me, I say hair on fire to be a little dramatic on purpose, but that have feelings about the idea is I'll kind of grin and remind them it's going to be all right.
Yeah.
That's something we're going to work through. I think as a district we communicate very well. That's something that's changed. We did a communication survey about a year and a half ago, and what was clear to us was the community said you communicate great. It's all over the place, and then some people that would say, well, we don't hear anything. So it's just. We have to, approach communication from, social media to direct stuff, texting, emailing, phone calls, that kind of stuff. And, but the new bill, the intent is to, make communication from schools and schools employees to parents and families and kids a little more out in the open. And, I know that there's a lot of reasons and motivations for that, and it's something we'll adapt and work through. It's certainly caught a lot of attention on social media over the summer.
Has. I know a lot of coaches are really upset about it.
Yeah, and
because from a recruiting standpoint, from just keeping your kids in line. I mean, the coaches, if your kid plays athletics, the coach plays a big part in your kid getting their homework done and getting to school, and they're checking on them constantly because they want to make sure they're staying eligible to play that sport.
Absolutely.
And now they can't do that in the same way they could. They monitor their social media to make sure they're not out there saying something stupid that's going to prevent them from getting recruited by college.
Yeah. So we have a tool. It's called Rooms. Like classrooms, but just rooms. And so, it's anybody that's employed in our district, whether they're, a teacher and a coach, or maybe just a paraprofessional coach, they all have access to that. The difference is it's app based. So the parent and the kid have to keep the app updated and keep their notifications turned on, those types of things. And so there was a lot of live and learns last year, and we worked out a lot of that. So fortunately, compared to most of Kentucky, we're going to be well ahead.
You're still ahead.
Yeah. So it's something we will work through. It'll be okay. And, I've grinned and told people I took kids to camp before there was cell phones, period.
Right.
Let alone being able to text them, and we'll get through it. It'll be okay. So that's been a hot topic this summer. For us, getting fully staffed before the first day of school is a big one. We are fully staffed in transportation. That's been a huge challenge, statewide and nationally, and we're blessed. We have a young man, Cameron Chester. He runs our transportation fleet, does a great job, very prideful, very professional. He's a product of Spencer County. And I worry that he never sleeps, but he tells me he does. And so we'll be ready. Buses will be rolling August 7th.
Yeah. Talk about a job that doesn't get the praise it deserves. School bus driver. Man.
Oh, yeah.
I'll tell you a funny
Especially
story.
back in our day.
I know we're getting low on time, but I'll tell you a funny story. I might be, quote unquote, the boss here, but at home I'm not. And, so one of the things I quickly learned that is not the funnest part of the job are inclement weather days, snow, ice. And this year, unfortunately, we had more than we've had in a while. And I remember one night we were laying in bed, and it was one of those nights we try to always make the decision the night before. If we know it's imminent, it's going to happen, let's go ahead and let people know. And so it was one of those situations where that just really wasn't possible. We were kind of waiting for weather to come in. The forecast, I guess, wasn't convincing. And so, Cameron and I, we kind of divvy up the county, and, he checks roads, I check roads, and then we kind of make a call, typically by 4:30, which just makes it for a long next day. And so he texts me at like 2 a.m. And so I have to leave my phone on, all day, and, just in case something happens. And so my text went off, and my wife, Tracy, looked over and she said, do you make him get up this early? And I said, well, it's his job. And so, I got to tell Cameron that, like, if you ever get mad at me, you've got a supporter in my life. Yeah. So it was pretty funny, but he just does, he is so forward thinking. He has to manage our fleet, our drivers, the routing, sub coverage, and it's one of those. There's so many people that make school possible for kids that typically the public doesn't, and that's a good thing, because you've seen districts where transportation has been such a challenge, it gets embarrassing, and so I think our folks understand and appreciate our drivers and our transportation team, and it's something we never want to take for granted. So very lucky, and I can say that our custodial teams, our buildings look awesome right now. Our food service is great. I don't know if you guys follow the high school, but they'll take pictures of their meal most days and put them on Facebook.
Oh, do they?
And you look at what they're feeding; it's pretty special. So, and our numbers of kids eating school lunch has gone up dramatically, which is a good thing. So, just continuing to push every way that we can.
We love it. We love to see it.
That's it. Yeah. Well, thank you very much for
Yeah.
joining us and talking
Giving us
to
some
us.
insight
and,
into what's going on in the school system.
Anytime.
Yeah.
Anytime.
That's a wrap on this week's Heartbeat of Small Town Life. Thanks for tuning in to Small Town Pulse, where stories are shared, voices are heard, and the spirit of community always comes through loud and clear. If you felt the pulse today, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. We're here every week with more small town dreams, challenges, and everything in between. Until next time, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep your finger on the pulse. This was Small Town Pulse with Steve and Melissa, and you're right on beat.